Hello, I am Dax Ska, and you're listening to my dental hygiene school experience. In this podcast, you're going to hear my experience of being in dental hygiene school and the stuff that goes around that, and anything else I might want to mention. Stay tuned, we've got another good episode coming right up. What's up, dental nerds? Hey, this is Dax Ska. I feel like I should reintroduce myself. It has been a while, Hopefully you still remember me. But, I just wanted to check in, see how you all are doing. I'm doing well. I've been working for the past year, I guess, in an endodontic office. That's kind of what I've been doing. I actually wanted to talk about that today to let you all know what that is like, especially being a dental hygiene student on break. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I also wanted to talk about if you are on a break from school for whatever reason, what would be a good use of your time? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Why don't we just jump right into it? All right, so let's talk about what it's like working in an endo office. And if you're new to dentistry and you're not really familiar with what an endodontic office is, we do root canals, and we do root canals all day, every day. And, in the dental field, especially in general dentistry, anytime you have to do a root canal, it has a reputation of being boring, The office I work for is small, but we specialize in root canals. And so it's a specialty office, and I'd say the expectations are fairly different than a general practice. And not to say that a general practice is not good, but our goals are different. So, I've mentioned before that in my dental assistant career, I've managed to learn very little about endo. And when you work in an endo office and there's only a few procedures that you do, you have to be dialed into your skill. So this is kind of what I've been learning over the past year. So with root canals, I knew the basics, but I just didn't have to do them very often. And the dentists I worked for in the past, they were more inclined to grab whatever they needed. So I basically did suction, which is the very, very basic of what a dental assistant does. But, no matter whether you work in general practice or a specialty office, it is so much more than that. And if you have a dentist that values you, they let you have responsibility that makes you feel valued. So, for example, in my office, we give post-op instructions, which is common in many dental offices. We have a script kind of that we go over with our patients, and we have it written down for them so if they forget what we say, because we throw a lot at them in 2 minutes. I forget where I was going with that. But anyway, so the clinic that I worked for after my first office, they provided services that were only covered by state insurance. And, it was a community health clinic, so they just wanted to work within their parameters. Now, root canals are, as far as I know, they're not covered by state insurance. So, the idea of doing root canals was so far from my mind. But now that I work in an endodontic office, I have to learn the different file types, or at least I did when I first started. So different file types, what do those little colors mean on the little files? But, I kind of enjoy it just because as a dental assistant, I get to play a much bigger role than I have in the past with general practice. I have to know the steps to the whole procedure, and I need to know how to operate the different equipment that we use. And when the dentist is talking to the patient, I need to keep an ear out for what they say, because it could be code for me to note something in my notes, or the fact that we're potentially changing gears in our procedure. But having said all that, I work with some really great people. When I first started, I had to learn a lot. And at the very beginning, if you're not familiar with all these different things, you make a lot of mistakes. Like I had an assistant I was the assistant, but I had my own assistant because, the doctor still has a schedule to keep and doesn't necessarily have the extra time to train someone. So the other assistants would help me and, hand me stuff like, oh, we're going to need this next, we're going to need that next. And, and that was very helpful. There was a point where I was able to be autonomous and not have to tell someone, oh, you're going to need this next. Having said all that, though, I remember one time I was working with the doctor, and he's like, I'm going to start quizzing you on what steps come next. So I was like somewhat prepared for that. But, sometimes you get in the procedure and you're like, muscle memory kicks in. You're not thinking consciously, oh, I need to do this next. You just grab the instrument that you need next. And one time the doctor said, okay, what's next? And I knew at this moment that in the past, for this particular step, I was pretty consistent about grabbing the right instrument. But in that moment, I panicked and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know. And then he told me eventually which one it was. But then for probably like 2 months, every time we got to that point, I just could not remember for the life of me what it was. And the thing is, I knew, but something about in the moment made me forget. Anyway, the doctors that I work with, they have been super patient with me, way more patient than I was with myself. I make many mistakes, or at least I did when I was starting to learn. That's part of the learning process. They helped me through the learning process. It was very helpful. I'd say it took me about 4 months before I felt like I was passable. When the patients don't catch on that you're still relatively new at this job. Every day, I always have opportunities to improve my skill, but you know what? I still make mistakes, and that's okay. The mistakes I make now are different, and when I make a mistake, the doctors know, oh, he doesn't know this. It's like maybe I'm having an off day, like maybe I'm a little extra tired, or, maybe my brain just glitched for some reason. Anyway, it's really great working there. Working in a specialty office, we get some cool toys that you won't see in a general practice. The dentist doesn't wear loupes like they do in general dentistry. Instead, they have a large microscope. Just kind of like, I wouldn't want to say it floats in the room, but it's like attached to the ceiling or the wall, and you kind of pull it to where you want it, and it just stays there. It's kind of like how the X-ray tube head is attached to the wall, and you bring it where you want it, and then it stays there. The microscope that we have offers excellent lighting and variable magnification. So if you want to see up close or not as much, either way works for you. Another cool toy we have is called the Gentle Wave. And if you're a dental nerd like me, you might want to look it up. Basically, it's a machine that disinfects the tooth. We call it regular, but it's bleach, so calcium hypochlorite, and also uses EDTA, and helps get out the infection of the tooth. And then when we dry it out, it gets nice and clean. You don't have to worry about contamination, anything like that. It's very effective at what it does, and it does make the dentist's life easier. And I feel like when I explain it, it doesn't sound that cool, but when I first was having my but when I was in the interview process and I was visiting to kind of check things out, my first thought was like, oh, that's actually really cool. And then we've also have another toy that's kind of like a laser. I worked with it a bit, and before I actually got to work with it, I was really excited to try it. When I finally got to work with it, I was very underwhelmed. It works similar to an ultrasonic, like what you do for ultrasonic irrigation, but it's just a different kind of equipment. I don't know if I'm just, expecting something out of Star Wars, but the laser doesn't even really make a cool sound when the dentist is using it. I was expecting like doom, doom, doom. I don't know. I can't make the right sound for it, but if you're watching Star Wars and they fire off the lasers, that's kind of more what I expected. Although, I don't know. I have quite an imagination, apparently. But from an experience point of view as a dental assistant, 1 out of 5 stars. You know, I personally did not benefit from it. But for the dentist side, from what I can tell, it's very efficient at what it does. I wouldn't say it's better or not as good as the GentleWave. It's just a different method of cleaning out the tooth and preparing it for the final restoration. Yeah, I don't know. My imagination is just a funny thing. Yeah, I don't know if we should put on space helmets when we use it or something. Maybe that'll make it more cool. Anyway, when people tell you that working in an endo office is boring, don't listen to them. At least my office. That's the only endo office I've ever been in, but I think it's pretty cool. I think that it's important to know about other specialties. In dental hygiene school, it's actually helpful to know this information because when you go out in the field and you're working as a dental hygienist and your patient's like, oh my gosh, I have tooth pain, I have a pretty good idea now of what to look for to see if it's an endodontic problem or maybe it's a cracked tooth or, whatever it may be. So that would be very helpful for the dentist that I work for them. Anyway, that is working in an endodontic office. And shout out to my office because you guys are awesome. And gonna miss you guys. So now I want to talk about if you happen to be on a break, and I'm not talking about your 1 or 2 week break between semesters. I'm talking about an extended break, perhaps not intended. What should you do to best use your time? So I only have a few things here, but I thought I'd share it, in case it helps someone. I just kind of brainstormed a few ideas, and, having been off for a year, I haven't been consistent in it, but, I try to keep my mind in all that. So first of all, my first thing that I have here is review what you've learned so far. Even if you just read over the slides or read through your textbook, that's helpful. And I'd say maybe read through a lecture. And I'm not saying you're going to memorize every single little detail, but, keep it fresh in your mind. So I've been reading through my lectures. I've actually been importing them into a different program so that way I can have the information more readily available for me. And, it's been helpful. I've been kind of over the past 2 months reviewing information, and there's a lot that I've forgotten. It's actually kind of interesting, maybe slightly scary, of how much you are capable of forgetting. And so that's why it's so important to keep it fresh in your mind. So even if you take 5 minutes a day, whether that be reviewing a lecture, maybe you have flashcards, electronic flashcards, or something like that, where you can quiz yourself. So you're like, okay, let's review a little bit of pharmacology or a little bit of periodontology. Maybe that will help keep the information fresh. And, speaking of keeping information fresh, why not use your instruments on your typodont? So, you have your instruments and you have your typodont. Just see what you can do with it. I know for me, I kind of have broken out my instruments now and then and practice, and it's like, oh, yeah, I do need practice. So I think that that's important. One of the things that I was learning was working with amalgam to do amalgam fillings. Unfortunately, I cannot practice that at home because I'm not equipped for that. There's just too much equipment, and definitely at home is not the environment for something like that. But, any other skills, practice your scaling, using your instruments, just little things. So when you go back, it's not such a shock, and you're forgetting oh my gosh, I don't even know what these are called, It's important to know what they're called, when to use them, all that stuff. And you probably know all this, but it's helpful. Something else you can do is, watch YouTube videos related to topics that you've already studied. I know there's a lot out there. Kind of take it with a grain of salt. Something I found is sometimes you'll come across nursing videos which touch on the same topic. I feel like sometimes they go into way more detail than we need to know. And my personal philosophy is don't fill your head with too much extra information because you'll get potentially caught up on the wrong details, and I feel like focus on the information that you do need to know. So another thing that I was thinking of is getting a job as a dental assistant, which I have done. The funny thing is, endodontics and dental hygiene are very different. There's not that much crossover because, endo meaning it's dealing with the inside of the tooth, and then dental hygiene, you're dealing with outside the tooth, so the gums, the outside, all that. So there is some crossover, like dealing with infection. Sometimes it can be a periodontal infection versus an endodontic infection. So there's a little bit. Knowing some of the medications, that's important, and just clinical skills in general. So for me, even though I worked in a root canal office, when you're doing health history, sometimes you have to review, okay, you have diabetes. Do you know what your last A1C is? What was your blood sugar this morning? That kind of stuff. Or, if they have asthma, like, is it well controlled? Has there ever been a problem at the dental office? There's a lot of good questions there that, I'll be asking the same questions when I go back to hygiene school and talking to my patients there. So one thing I did notice, even though there's not a whole lot of information, the doctors generally, at least the ones that I've worked for, don't mind when you ask questions. And, I am the kind of person that asks a million questions, and sometimes I don't practice self-awareness, and I ask a lot of questions. But, a few questions here and there, the doctors don't seem to mind answering questions. So I think questions more related to what you're doing. So for me, learning about endodontic related stuff, sometimes it does have crossover to dental hygiene. But, I tend to like to see the whole picture. So anyway, so just keep information fresh. But here's some other things that you may not have thought of. Get involved in your hobbies. I'm not talking dental related hobbies. As big of nerds as we want to be in the dental field, get involved in music or puzzles, or if you do running or traveling, or maybe you like to go to an open mic night. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but join a club. Maybe you play an instrument and you want to keep up on that. And when I'm saying get involved in hobbies, I'm not saying like spend a ton of money. I mean, a lot of hobbies you can do without spending money. As students, generally we don't have a lot of money because, tuition's high, we're working less, or not at all. And, I think if you focus on things that you enjoy, you've been given an opportunity. So if you're on a break, this is my philosophy. If you are on a break, this is an opportunity. And, when you're in school, you can't do these things. So do the things you can't do when you're in hygiene school. Something else, spend time with friends and family. I'm sure they're all missing you. And, take advantage of that time. Go out, have a camping trip. I don't know. Bring them along on one of your hobbies. This is all just off the top of my head. So I'd say just take advantage of the time that you have. Enjoy it. It does not have to be all work. Catch up on your favorite TV show. I'm sure you can all think of something. But something else that I want to say is before you go back to school, if you're able to, take a week or two off and just rest. If it's in the cards for you, do a getaway. Even a mini getaway. Long weekend getaway. I think that's great. Um, yeah, because, that's what I was told before starting hygiene school at the very beginning. I think I took about a week and a half off before I started school, and someone's like, don't do anything, like rest, because this is the last time you're going to rest for 2 years. And, I think that resting is very important. Um, Also, another thing to do if you know that you're going back to school, kind of get prepared for it. Something I would do is kind of plan out some meals, or kind of what is your routine going to look like. So if you know your schedule, okay, so I know like on Monday mornings I have to be at school early, so maybe take a shower the night before, or like how do I pack my lunch? Make sure I have enough snacks when you go to the grocery store. Buy granola bars or something. Think ahead. Make sure you know where all your stuff is, your dental hygiene supplies. So where are your scrubs? Where are your instruments? I know if you have things put away for a little while, I have all my stuff on a shelf, and yeah, it's there ready for me. I'm ready for it, whenever the time comes. Bam, I'll be ready. Just throw my scrubs in the wash, freshen them up, and I'm good to go. Anyway, that's kind of all I've got about being on break from dental hygiene school. Um, I think if you have other ideas, you can comment on my Instagram. My Instagram is at Daxka Dental, or is it .dental? No, it's Daxka Dental. But anyway, find me there, and you can comment. I'd love to hear your ideas. Even if you haven't been on break, maybe if you have ideas for on your 2-week break between semesters, what are your ideas? I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, that's all I got for today. I'm going to sign off here. Hopefully, you'll hear from me soon. But until then, keep it real, keep it nerdy, dental nerds. Take care. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my podcast. I appreciate your support on this journey, and until next time, I am Dax Scott.